Hello, hello. I guess the mic is working, which is good. So hope it stays like this till the end of the meetup. So first of all, my name is Tiago. I'm from DevTools Porto, and I want to thank you all for coming and wish you that you have a good time here. So I already started with beer, so that's a good way to start. I hope we can finish the same way and talk a little bit more. So I'm just here to introduce a little bit more about DevTools Porto. Our idea is to promote some of the DevTools and some of the programming language that we that the community thinks are worth talking about it. So taking that into account, I want to ask you if you at the end of this talk, if you think there's some dev tools or some language or anything else you guys think is worth bringing to DevTools Porto as a talk, please feel free to reach to us and say something. You can reach to us at ReviewPad. So we are promoting this through ReviewPad. So that's the best way to talk with us. You can join our Discord or just at the end. All the talks will be available on the ReviewPad YouTube. Okay. Yeah, that's it from my side. And also want to thank Miguel for sharing this session with DevOps Support, which is pretty cool. So thank you, Miguel.
Thank you, Tiago. Hello, streaming people. I hope this is working. I hope this is... Okay, there's a ghost in the tool. All right, well, so we're DevOps Porto. This is the 57th meetup. We talked with the good folks at ReviewPad here, and Marcelo himself proposed a talk a while back. We've been organizing this since. So what is this DevOps Porto thing? For those who know me, you've heard this many times, but there are always some new people. We're here to build bridges between people, to build bridges between development, operations, communities, companies. Build bridges. I think it's essentially, even when people start saying that DevOps is dead. You can find us in all the usual spots. If you want to go to the platform meeting, is the other room. Today's talk is about fluid pull requests, and we'll find out what this thing here is. We all know what pull requests are, but what are these fluid things? Marcelo, our speaker, is quite a distinguished person. Like I usually have like 3 words and they're there, but I didn't know what to cut. So he's an Oxford Ph.D, IBM, Google, and SonarQube alumnus, and the co-founder of ReviewPad, which actually works out of this office. And after the talk, we'll have some time for Q&A because I think it's an interesting topic to discuss and with lots of feelings. So I'll hand over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Just put up the presentation here. So it's my great pleasure to be here talking with you on the both meetups. Yeah, I came back from abroad a couple of years ago, but then was COVID, so I didn't have a chance to really go into the DevOps Porto community. So I'm really happy to start being part of those bridges. So a little bit about me. So I'm on this mission for the last 10 years or so to help everyone safely contribute to any code base in minutes. Okay, so this is really what I'm all about. So professionally, I had the And so when we talk about fluid pull requests, so I wanted to talk about 3 different things today. So the first is really like the why why a pull request can be a superpower, and why they are not, perhaps, and why they are not becoming really like a superpower anymore. And I don't know if through with this sort of DevOps is dead. I hope not. Then how can we make pull requests really a superpower? And this is really about providing the best experience for everyone. So there's multiple stakeholders in pull requests. Sometimes people don't realize that, and it's really about making it the best experience for everyone that has to deal with them. And then finally, talk a little bit about the what. So, and particularly what, not only what pull requests are, but what we are kind of doing at ReviewPad to help with that. And it's really about intelligence and personalized automations. At least that's kind of the direction we are taking at the moment. Feel free to ask questions. I mean, we'll also have some time at the end, but I'll try not to be so much controversial. I know that pull requests tend to be a little bit controversial at times, but I'll do my best to do that. So let's start with the why. And so just to take a little step back and look a little bit about what was at the inception of pull requests. And to be at the inception of pull requests, it's really important to understand this concept of Git and Git branching. So let's meet our team. So we have on one way Robin Full. So this is one team member, and also we have Cat Stack. Right? So these two developers are going to collaborate. And, okay. And they decided to use Git as a collaboration method. And so when you pull up, they use a Git server, and when they basically pull up the Git history, what you see is really directly a cyclic graph. So where the nodes are really the commits, and then you have relationship between commits, right? So one commit can come after the other, and then you can have these sort of branches from particular commits. And then you have some callers in these commits, in these nodes. And these callers are essentially the branches, right? So branches are nothing more, Git branches are nothing more than just references to commits. So sometimes people also think that branches are sequences of commits or like lists of commits, but this is really not what a branch is in Git. A branch is just a reference to a particular commit. So here we have 4 branches. And when you're basically building on Git, you know that there is typically one branch, which is sort of the main branch. And then you can have other types of branches like the stage branch or some feature branches, and also some bug branches. So what happens? So you have this sort of server, and then Robin, the first thing that it does some Git clone, right? So it's going to start collaborating, and when it does a clone, it basically copies everything. And now you basically locally, Robin has in his local system basically the entire history, and it has 2 different branches immediately, right? It has the origin from the main branch, which is this one here, and it also has this local one. And then when you basically do a clone, you also have to point to a particular version, right? Because here we are representing 3 different versions, snapshots of the file system of whatever project you're working on. And this is typically known as the head, right? So the head is pointing to a branch, actually can point to also a commit, and then you basically are here. So the next step is, they decided to work, and there is this thing called feature branches, right? So a lot of people so the first controversial thing is, a lot of people are basically saying, well, feature branches or branching is terrible. People coming from SVN and all these, more traditional, I guess, let's call it traditional version control systems. Yeah, try not to word the word legacy. We use the word legacy a lot. But like if you talk about feature branches, typically, you are working in isolation. You want to work on something that should not be long-lived, and so you basically create, you check out and create a new branch. So in this case, you're basically fixing some bug. You associate the ticket number and in the branch just to make it easier, and so you're working on a bug associated with the ticket 400. So when you do that, basically, you have not done much. The only thing you've done is really to change the head, saying, okay, I'm now in this bug 400, and I've created another pointer to this commit, and I called it bug 400. So then Robin does some work, and eventually Robin is going to commit, right? So when you do this commit, what you're doing locally, so you have not done anything in the server, you're just working locally, so you're on your plane and you don't have internet. That was the sort of the idea in the beginning, that you could just work in a sort of anywhere. You basically create a new node, right? So this blue node, and now you're pointing out to it. And so you're kind of branching. That's why you kind of have this notion of branching and this commit leaves above. You do a bit more work, and then you have another one. And so kind of now you are done, right? So basically what you want now is to say, okay, I'm done with my changes. I want to push them. So when you push them, you basically copy it. You're transferring it to the server. And now the server has these 2 extra commits and also a new branch, which is this bug 400 that lives there, right? So sometimes the important thing is that, this commit that is between them, it's not really associated with a bug 400 branch. There is no such thing. This is one of the misconceptions that people sometimes have. So now you're done. You're not quite done, because now what Robin says is, okay, I want to propagate these changes. I want to propagate the changes from this bug 400 branch into the main branch. And this is really where things become more interesting, right? So you have done some work, you have pushed that into a sort of isolated, branch, and now you basically want to merge it back to the main branch. And this is typically this kind of commit that you want to create, which is known as the merge commit. You want to perform this notion of merge. And now Cat comes and says, wait 1 second, we need to verify these changes, right? And this is really where this whole thing started, right? So it started because you want to push some changes that you have performed, but you want to push them into a particular branch, but you need to have some verification mechanism to do that. And so what are pull requests? Pull requests is in a way nothing more than a kind of mechanism with a nice UI, which was really popularized by GitHub. So a lot of people, even nowadays, associate certain things like Git with GitHub and pull requests with code reviews. These things are really disconnected in some way, even though GitHub obviously helped popularize a lot of these. And it's really a way to help merge feature branches, right? It's really to help merge these kind of branches that are coming from different places. And there's 3 different things that really pull requests are very useful for. The first one is to review. So you can actually visualize, because it's a nice UI, you can visualize the Git diff between the branches. And this is very nice, because when you can visualize it, you can then discuss on it. You can make comments on the code and suggest changes. And finally, you also have a way to control the merge procedure, right? You have the way to say, okay, who is the person, who is the stakeholder that is going to eventually just merge the changes. So this is basically why pull requests are kind of widely used, not only in the context of, in all kinds of contexts, actually. So, but fundamentally, pull requests came from this open source world, where for you to do a contribution in an open source project, you had to create this notion of fork, and then you have to basically make our changes from this fork back to the original project. And the key part of that is that there was, we didn't assume anything about Rob and Cat, right? So the point is that Rob and Cat might not know each other. So it is critical to use pull requests for contributions that come from untrusted parties, right? So if I don't know the person who is providing these contributions, I cannot simply allow this person, this agent, to just push things into my main branches or my long-lived branches or the branches that can go into production. So I want you to take this message that the reason why pull requests were really created is to allow collaboration between untrusted parties. So when you have very low trust, and now we are using them, we are kind of misusing them where you have full trust between people. And I think this is the key message of what we are really trying to say. So this is the origin of pull requests. Now you might ask, okay, how popular are pull requests? And so I actually went and dig up the data. So you can actually go and look at all the events from GitHub in the public projects, and you can start querying them. So what I start showing here is, okay, from 2012, when they started collecting the public events from GitHub, so 10 years ago, there were about 450,000 pull requests merged on all the public projects on GitHub. This was 10 years ago. And now we are in about 30 million. So we went several orders of magnitude from using this mechanism. And this is obviously evident because, a lot more open source is happening right now. A lot more people are just using open source. GitHub has a lot more users. But still, we are going, several orders of magnitude. And this is just on the public data, right? So if you actually look at all of GitHub Enterprise, on-premise, and cloud, according to GitHub, last year there were 170 million pull requests merged, right? So in the space of this talk, there'll be about 50,000 pull requests merged. So I want that to sink a little bit. That in like half an hour, there were 50,000 pull requests merged, right? So people are using this at a very crazy pace. And then if you actually measure how many bots, how many of these pull requests is depend bot, or all the bots that are there, just creating pull requests, it even becomes more mind-boggling. So this is according to the Octoverse report, just putting some references here, and then you can kind of dig into some of this data. But the main point is that the usage of pull requests is totally widespread. So if you are a developer that went into the job market after 2013, for example, and you're using GitHub, basically pull request is a way that you've learned to collaborate. Trunk-based development is something for the dinosaurs, legacy, right? That those things are kind of legacy for some people, and you're not really teaching this in universities, right? So that's something that really kind of makes me sad, is that I talk with some professors and they're like, okay, pull requests, and like, whatever, we use GitHub, right? So maybe that's how they think that the market is evolving and the industry is evolving. So pull requests went a long way from being used in the open source to being used in all these enterprises and all these teams, right? So, and I like to call this the sort of pull requests a la DevOps today. So pull requests really became sort of a backbone, and they really rode this ride of the DevOps movement that has been kind of widespread, and it became kind of the backbone of CI/CD best practices, right? So they are kind of the granularity, the unit of work of a developer is a pull requests. So there are companies, for example, that measure developer productivity based on the number of pull requests that you are merging per week, which is sort of crazy because yeah. So I think that pull requests are great in the sense that there is three things that you can really do with them. You can document work, of course, you can automate, and you can audit some parts of this work. And you can do this not only for that kind of review, but you can actually do this now, with the CI/CD best practices, right? So you can use pull requests as a way to say, okay, let's spawn up the CI. So let's integrate this with our Jenkins pipeline. Let's not run it on every single push, for example, or commit. And let's just do it this when people are creating pull requests or sending a push to a pull request to save some effort. You can definitely use it, and are using it for reviews, right? So to do code reviews and discussions, and also to control this merge, right? Because you basically, if you're in an enterprise setting, the merge action is quite critical from time to time, right? Because if you merge to a particular, if you push to a particular branch, you might trigger some events, right? So it depends on your environments. If you're like a multi-stage environment, like when you have like stage, pre-prod, prod, and so on. So it really depends where you're pushing. So the act of merging actually also triggers some deployment strategy, right? So pull requests kind of went from this niche of being used in open source as a way to kind of like protection gate for changes in your open source projects to really become a way of working, like a central piece of collaboration where developers kind of communicate through it, right? So if you are kind of fully remote and a sort of a synchronous way, the pull request and the ticket are kind of the way you kind of almost talk with your developers, and of course you have Slack and stuff like that. But in some companies, people are really kind of almost communicating through pull requests. So what is the workflow that happens? So let's dig a little bit into this. So Robin opens a pull request, the CI is being triggered, right? So that's the first thing. So some automation is happening. You're running the build, you're checking the tests, you have some bots running the linters, all the automations are happening. And then Robin is kind of enters the review phase. And in the review phase, you're gonna wait. You're gonna wait for some feedback. Eventually you have that feedback and you do some rework. Right? And this is a kind of iteration, right? So you do some rework, and then eventually, you have to kind of make a push if you need to do some rework, and then the cycle continues, right? So another iteration starts. If you're lucky, you get an approval, right? So you go through a stage of getting the approvals, and then finally you can actually decide on a merge action. So if you look at this picture, basically we went from, I just want to put some changes from one branch to another into, this sort of complicated step where we are kind of mixing automation with human collaboration, right? Because here I've now added in the stage 2, you have Robin waiting for Cat, And this is not like the waiting time that you have when you trigger the CI. You know that I triggered the CI. I know that it's going to take on average maybe half an hour, but I know that I can come back to this PR half an hour. I can optimize the build time and the CI times. But when I ask for a review for someone else, I don't really have a kind of a moment where I know that this person is going to come back to me. So we are kind of mixing this sort of, I know when the stage is going to pass with I have to wait for another human. And this is really when things become a bit messy, because sometimes you have PRs which are open for days or weeks, and this is really just waiting because of the human collaboration phase. You're not really waiting for some automation, some bot to finish. And so what is the fundamental problem that we see here? The problem is that Robin goes through the exact same process for every PR. It doesn't matter if you're changing like 1 file, 2 files, 50 files, 100 files, whatever the files are, all along Robin has been modifying these files for you go through the exact same process. And more troublesome is that if you are in the context of a team, the trust that you are building between these team members is being undervalued, and that's because Robin needs to wait for Cat regardless of the changes, right? So regardless of what you are doing, you are not really utilizing this trust that you are building in your team, because you are using a mechanism that is fundamentally sort of low trust, right? This pull request that was created for getting contributions from open source. And so this is a sort of mind-blowing thing that is happening, is that we completely misuse this thing of low trust mechanism into an environment where if you are fully agile, your team members, you sometimes even advocate that you shouldn't have tickets, just go for it, right? So what we see is that pull requests went from being kind of a superpower in a way to becoming a super bottleneck, right? And this is the thing that we are tackling. So what is this? How this super bottleneck manifests? The first thing is you have a lower throughput, right? So if you start measuring how long your pull requests stay open, and if you take an average time to production of 9 days, this is a time that it takes you from first commit into the changes are in the long-lived branch. If you take it a 9-day average time to production, 7 days are spent on code reviews, right? So it's an overwhelming majority of time where you are basically blocked because of this human interaction that is happening, and many times you don't really know why. The second one is that you have a higher change failure rate. So I'm using here very specific metrics in a way coming from Dora, because I really think that pull requests are at the core of some of these metrics. And so if you look at the metrics of statistics of the code reviews itself, what we have seen in the teams is that 50 to 90% of the code reviews are just looks good to me. They are rubber stamp reviews. So they actually provide you negative value, because you are waiting for someone and you're going to get a thumbs up, and you don't get any value out of that. So in fact, when you look at the code reviews that make the code change, that's like 5% typically, right? So only 5% of the code reviews actually have comments in the code that make the code change. So what is happening a lot is that developers are totally desensitized for code reviews, right? So they get some pull requests to review, and they are simply saying, okay, skim through the changes. Okay, looks good to me. I need to move on, right? I need to move on to the next thing. They don't have time, but a problem is that they are using that time for all the pull requests, right? They don't have a way to prioritize on which pull requests actually are relevant and which actually might have some bugs lurking. And so the third one, which is something is dear to me, is it actually gets a higher developer frustration, right? So when you have this mechanism, at some point, over time, Robin is going to start wondering, okay, why should I wait on every PR? Should I work in this company in a way? If it takes me 2 weeks, so I've worked in companies where it took me like a month to get changes into production, right? That's not acceptable nowadays, because you want to be working faster, right? I see friends of mine going to startups because, oh yeah, I can just push the changes, right? So this is great. Developers want to be able to push the changes, and so of course you probably have heard of Dora metrics. You have seen the latest report on the DevOps state of the DevOps, and I really think that a lot of what's happening in terms of some of the metrics are being really influenced by this big misuse of pull requests. And some companies are doing metrics. They're really believing more and more that it's sort of becoming the number one bottleneck in engineering teams is really the pull requests and this idea of just going through the same process regardless of what are the changes. So hopefully you have seen like why pull requests are not really a superpower anymore. And then so how can we actually get this back, right? How can we provide the best pull request experience for everyone? And so you can take one approach, Dave Farrell's approach. He has a lot of YouTube videos about this. And this approach is very simple. Just don't use pull requests. Figure it out some other way, some cultural way. Pair programming, mob programming, I don't know, whatever. If you're working remotely, I don't know how you're going to solve that. But yeah, just synchronize the time zones somehow. And just fix this problem with that. You don't have to use pull requests. And I think it's fair to say that in a way. But if I go back to this image, right? This image where I see the workflow and I see people waiting for each other, I think we can solve that in a different way. And basically, that's the whole idea of the fluidity, is that you should be able to just have something that does not break the developer flow, right? As a pull request experience. So the fundamental thing to note is that Robin shouldn't have to go through the same process on every PR. So how can we give Robin this experience? So let's take a first scenario, the minor documentation change. If I'm doing a minor documentation change, why should I go through this process? Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I don't need to have a review anymore, right? So if I am able to tag things and say, okay, this is just a small documentation change in my team, then I should just simply be able to approve or just bypass the code review process altogether. In the second scenario, for example, if I'm deprecating an API, so if I'm deprecating an API and I'm really know what I'm doing, maybe I also don't need to go through this process, right? Maybe, and here is when things can become a bit more controversial, maybe code review should be done after the merge. Maybe the developer should have the power to merge the code and just get someone else to look at it after the code is already merged. And if you look at some other scenario, say I'm actually doing a critical database migration, which is basically what scares a lot of teams that we talk with, then this is pretty critical. So maybe what you actually need an extra reviewer to be doing the review after you already get the approval from CAT. So the point of this fluidity is not to stop using pull requests. It's just to simply say, okay, instead of having the same process, depending on regardless of the changes and who actually made these changes, how can we have a way to configure it so that we can have different methods and different procedures, different workflows, depending on some parameters, which we're actually enforcing already informally in our team sometimes. So the fundamental idea is that we should not associate code reviews with pull requests, and we should actually decouple the code review step from the rest of the process. So we don't need to have this picture all the time. What you can actually have sometimes is, the review is taken out and actually happens after the merge, right? So just an example. It could actually happen after the deploy. It could happen before the CI, right? If you're doing pair programming, why should you go through the review stage altogether, right? Just open the PR to get all the automation going and making sure that your linters are passing, your build is passing, whatnot, and then just say, this was pair programmed with this person, and then just go. Right? Because you're just basically going to wait for that person to go back to their desk, do a thumbs up, and then go back to you and say, I've done the thumbs up. Like, why? It doesn't make sense. So what is our definition of fluid pull requests? Is an extension of vanilla pull requests in a way, with a pretty fine set of rules that can automate these code reviews and the merges themselves. Right? So this is pretty much what this idea of fluid pull requests is. And what's the main goal? The main goal is very simple. As a developer, I want to provide a consistent or get a consistent and transparent experience that minimizes the time I'm waiting for other developers. That's pretty much what I want to do. As a developer, I know typically what I'm doing. If I don't know, I'm going to ask for help anyway. I don't need to be blocked by this pull request experience on every single change, every single ticket that I'm doing. So what are some of the benefits that we observe, that we speculate, of course? We are trying to talk with more people about this. The first one is that, it's quite obvious. You're going to get shorter development cycles, right? Because you don't need to be blocked. 7 out of 9 days won't be blocked because of code reviews. The second one is actually you're going to improve your security, right? Because if you know what is actually more critical in your code base, you can simply have dedicated review processes for those, and you can have some sort of rule that essentially enforces those policies. And so that's going to make your security go higher. And third, you actually can improve your compliance process, right? Because if I have, for example, some personalized identifiable data in my database, then I may want to go and say, okay, I want to have a very dedicated review step whenever I change this code, and then I can give this to my auditors. And my auditors don't need to go and look at, what is my pull request procedure when I'm modifying some configuration that doesn't have to do with anything that's about my SOC compliance, for example. And fourth, when you get better code reviews, I fundamentally believe you're going to get higher code quality, right? So if you look at all these sonar sources of the world, basically what they advocate is don't tackle technical debt in one go. Do it sort of in this sort of fix the leak type of approach where you need to do it incrementally, and you need to do it in the code review step, in the pull request step. So if you have a better pull request methodology, you're going to get higher code quality across, in some time, in some quarters. So let's move on a little bit to the what. What is this? What could be these automations, right? So there's a couple of prerequisites for you to be able to use fluid pull requests. And the first one is really key. You need to be in an environment where you can trust the developers to merge before code review. If this is not a case in your company, just ask why and talk about it. Well, why shouldn't this be allowed? Right? So if you cannot merge your code, if you make some code changes and you are pretty sure that these code changes are correct, and if you have a very good CI, if you have a strong CI system, that you could even do things like rollbacks, right? So if you're coming back from these trunk-based development procedures where you're able to just push to master, you have feature flags, and you have automatic rollbacks when your build fails, this kind of thing. Why shouldn't you be able to do this kind of approach when you have pull requests, right? Why can't I simply merge? So that's the first thing, because if you cannot merge the code, it's very hard, right? You need to have some other way of encoding trust, right? Because it's pretty much what you're talking about. You're talking about trusting your developers to merge code. And we've seen some cases of, I'm dealing with some transactions. What if I have some malicious player? I mean, if you don't trust your developers to not inject, they can inject malware in so many ways that you won't catch them in code reviews anyway, right? So this idea that you're going to just catch things with pull requests when you have like microservices and 500 repos in your GitHub, and if you think they're just going to do it in like one file and you're going to catch that, well, good luck, right? I mean, right. The second thing that you need is really a kind of spec. Like you have, as a team, you typically have some workflows that you are following that are informal, right? They live in some documentation files. They live in some Confluence file or some README or some contributing MD in your repositories. And this is sort of text. And they live in the head of the tech lead of, okay, I open this PR. I have no idea if I'm going to get bashed or if it's going to be great, right? This sort of fear that sometimes developers have of, I'm going to find out after 3 months who is the right person to ask the review for, because this person is a nice guy, right? So this person is going to give me the thumbs up. And this is exactly what you want to avoid. You want to avoid this kind of, unequal distribution of knowledge in your team and distribution of trust. So if you are able to specify these kind of policies, and it's really asking very simple questions, right? As a team, like as a developer, you pretty much know like what kind of changes are considered to be low risk. For example, could be automatically merged. I think that once you work in a code base long enough, you pretty much have a good idea of what those changes are. And similarly, what are the best people to review kind of these changes, right? So when I make some change, typically after a while, I know that who are the right people to review these changes. So if the idea here is that, okay, if I'm able to specify these policies, then I'm able to enforce them. And finally, if you allow the first one, so if you allow developers to merge before code reviews, you shouldn't just not skip the code review altogether, right? You should have a mechanism that you can track these pull requests so that you can review them after the merge, right? So one of the things that we typically advocate is, okay, just put a label on the PR with a ship, for example, or it was shipped or it was merged without review, and just spend 20 minutes a week just seeing what was merged without a review that was considered low risk, just to get knowledge of the PR, right? Because a lot of people do code reviews not to actually review the code and improve the quality, it's just to learn what's happening in the code base. Right? So you can do this. You don't need to block someone else to do that. That's kind of the other thing. So wouldn't it be nice if I want to make the development cycle shorter, if I could simply specify pull requests that can be automatically merged? I mean, I think this could be kind of nice. And since we're in DevOps, everyone loves YAML. So wouldn't it be nice if I could put it in the YAML where I could say, okay, I have a workflow. This workflow is called auto merge documentation changes. And I simply want to say, okay, if I have a PR that only has markdown.md files as an extension, then I want to just automatically merge with a rebase. Right? So if in my team this is fine, then I would just like to specify this and get it enforced. That's another example. So I'm waiting a lot when I open a PR, a lot for getting some reviewers. And typically as a new joiner, you don't really sometimes know who are the right people to review your code. So in the same exercise, wouldn't it be nice if I have some new joiner definition, some group of new joiners that, for example, I could specify it as the people that have less than 10 PRs open or merged in this code base, or have started the company at less than 3 months ago. So some dynamic way of specifying this group of people. And then I could simply say, okay, if I have a PR where the author of the PR is an element of this new joiner group, then I simply want to assign reviewers from the group of tech leads, right? So developers that are starting out, they don't need to worry about who I need to find for review, right? So if you start doing this kind of enforcement, then you can start going extra levels, right? You can start saying, okay, every pull request in my company, every pull request needs to have an associated ticket, right? So we don't want developers doing things that are not accounted for, because with sprints and Scrum and so on, right? So we love these things. So okay, just let's do it. Let's make developers go through this process, right? So if there's a not meeting actually, if I don't have linked issues, then I want to have a comment in my PR saying this PR doesn't have a linked issue, right? So I'd like to say, here is a YAML, and then I open the PR, and then very below, right? So I have a comment in my PR saying you forgot to add a linked issue here, right? So you may want to break and now close the PR, make the developer very unhappy, or just put a note, do whatever you think is best to make sure that this practice is enforced. And now, when I talked about security, I mean, I just talked about things like metadata and, but one of the things that you can actually start doing, and that I'm quite interested in getting some feedback, is special reviews when you're actually changing code that is critical, right? So say I have some Go code. I'm still almost in the DevOps, right? Go is very into DevOps still. So I have some Go code, and I just want to annotate this code with just a tag, a code comment. So that's the first line that says, okay, this is a critical function, right? So what I'm basically saying here is that I, as a developer, understood that this is a critical function. And so what I want now is a system where if a developer goes and opens a PR which changes this function, not just change like as a white space, actually changes the meaning of the function, I would like to have a different review process, right? So what I can do then is something like this, right? So I want to have, if the code that was modified has an annotation critical, then what I might want to do is to say, okay, I want to add a label to this PR saying critical. I might want to assign a particular type of reviewer, so the owners. And I actually want to assign also a comment. So I want to notify someone. I don't want to make the reviewer, but say, okay, you have modified something, Marcelo, some critical code was modified. So even if I didn't have time to actually review these changes, I was notified and I can take a look at them later. So this is, in a way, really what ReviewPad is all about, right? So everything I just showed you, it's open source, so you can use it for free. But it's really a sort of a service that works on GitHub, which allows a team to implement this fluid pull request approach. So there's a couple of characteristics. So we follow this GitOps approach where the specification doesn't live in some third-party service that only the managers or whatnot can control. It actually lives in the GitHub repo. So everyone in the team can actually see what spec people are, enforcing or trying to enforce, and what's going to happen when I open a PR with these characteristics. And I can open a PR that actually modifies it as well. The second one is that it's more than a specification, right? So what the thing actually does, it looks at the spec and it enforces it, right? So you don't have to worry anymore about all these manual actions that you as a developer are doing in pull requests. This is all taken care of for you. And third, it allows you for this smooth transition from vanilla PRs, right? If I just want, for example, to add a label with the size of the PR, just to create awareness that I don't know what's. I think he was not happy about this smooth transition. So, so if I just want to go from normal PRs into some kind of fluid pull request approach, I can start very little, right? I can start by just simply creating awareness that, you know, in our team, the last 20 PRs, they were considered large, right? So they're large by our standards of what large is. So we should just create smaller PRs, and that's going to be great. So it's also open source. So it lives on GitHub, on ReviewPad /ReviewPad. And so I just want to show you a little bit how this works. So let me just, so this is our repo. So feel free to take a look. It's all in Go, which might be a good thing or not a good thing, depending on, you know, who you talk with. And what's happening, right? So let's say I'm just opening here a file. So this is our, I hope you can see. So this is a specification of a ReviewPad YAML. You can basically specify things like labels. You can also specify groups of people, as I said. These groups can actually be dynamic. And then you have rules. These rules are rules over or predicates over the pull requests. So this one, for example, like S file extensions of MD. So you can actually have rules across the description itself. For example, you can say if the description contains certain regex on the strings and ownership and so on. And then after that, you have basically workflows, right? So you have, you know, one workflow could really be, okay, depending on the size of the PR, I just want to add a label with the size of it. I want to lint all my comments. And at the end, I want to give a welcome message every time I have a new joiner in the team and they open the first PR, yay. And then you can also have, you know, protect the license and so on. And then at the end, I can basically put things like what I just showed you, right? If I make a change on the markdown, I want to automatically get it done. So let's take a look at that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the README file. I'm just going to add the tiger back as sort of the mascot of this project. I want to commit the changes, create a PR. I'm just going to create it with this, propose changes. And so the way we usually work is actually, you know, we have a pull request template. And in this pull request template, at the end, as I mentioned, you can actually make things about the description itself. So we are giving developers the power to say, I want, as a developer, to be able to ship this PR without a code review, right? So the only thing I have to do is I have to go here and say, yeah, just go, let's ship it. And the system, the spec, is going to understand whether I have had the power to ship these changes or not, right? So it's sort of, you allow the developers to do this, but you also somewhat enforce, because you don't want developers that don't have the power to ship to just be selecting this ship option all the time. But you want developers that have this power to be able to know when to use it. So I'm going to create a PR. And then, you know, as expected, what's going to happen is the service is going to run. And it's going to perform these automations, right? So it's going to add the labels. It's complaining a lot about a lot of things, but it's, you know, adding a label with the size. It's adding a label with the ship. It merged the PR, and it performed the error report, right? With whatever errors I made in terms of compliance. I have uncommitted, unconventional commits detected. The title is also not properly, the format is not properly done, and I don't have a linked issue in this PR. Then I could basically iterate over the PR if I didn't merge it automatically, and then this kind of report would be updating on every push, right? So that's ideally what you like to do. But so this is the idea of fluid pull requests and how you can basically use sort of services on your GitHub to allow developers to have a better, you know, just better flows when they are making changes. And with that, I am done. So I'd like to get some answers or some time for answers. I think we have just maybe.
Yeah, when it comes to the size, is the size controlled only by change count in Git's perspective, or is it the amount of files that have been changed, or both?
You can have both. So
Okay.
basically what you have is you have a, I mean, as I probably mentioned here, you have a kind of language here, right? And you have built-ins, and you can have built-ins. Let me actually show you this one here. It's a bit better. So you can have, actually, I'm going to show you the actual docs. So basically, we have docs.reviewpad.com, and basically you have built-ins, right? So in the built-ins, you can actually see, commits, and then you have, for example, commit count, you have the size, file count. So you have different, it's an ecosystem of things, right? You can add your own built-in that says, okay, I only care about additions on this type of files, on these extensions, and then you can basically have your own spec based on that.
Those are the list of the predicate functions that are used and can be combined into an expression type format inside the YAML.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So these are the pieces of the puzzle, so you don't have to worry about making API calls to GitHub, right? Because that's you could do everything with JavaScript, right? You can just put everything in the GitHub action, but then you have to deal with am I making the right API to GitHub? Am I doing the right handling? Basically, what we are providing here is an abstraction where you can do a spec at a much higher level, and then it doesn't really matter if you're using GitHub or GitLab. That should be a third party that basically makes the API requests for you.
So you're a startup. I don't know how many clients you have or how much you've experienced with, but how much faster is it?
I think it depends on how much slow you are.
That's a good answer. You can stop right there.
So I think there is two different things you want to measure here. One is definitely the speed, and the other one is the quality of your process, right? So there are teams that use these not to get faster, but just to get a better process, a better experience for the developers. And that counts a lot, right? Because you might have, a very fast, you can have, 0 wait time, just merge everything, right? But that's not going to give you what you're looking for. So I think if you have like cycle times of like 5 days, 6 days on average, you can reduce that to like half fairly quickly. Like with basic automations, like when you have some notion of approval, you have 2 reviewers that have signed off, just merge after that. Don't wait for the author of the PR to remember that they got the approvals, and then they wait, they go to sleep, and then they wake up, they take their morning coffee, and then the PR is just staying there, right? So if you have all these automations, you can cut your cycle time pretty dramatically with basic stuff. I would say like 50-60% of them are just really basic. I think there's another. I think there's.
Congrats, first of all, on the presentation. My question is, do you have an idea of which are the most common workflows that people are using?
Yeah, so getting the size of the PR is definitely quite common, or basic reviewer assignments. That's also, one of the most common things is, you have your Terraforms in the same repo as all of your application codes. If a developer starts touching your Terraform files, at least let's get the SREs in, as a reviewer, because maybe they don't really know what they're doing. So those kinds of rules, when you have like clear separation of responsibilities, those seem to be quite simple and quite helpful. But then you have things like I was mentioning, like I want to auto merge depend about PRs, right? If the build passes, why is this staying open? Because no developer wants to go and look at version of whatever package that you have went from 3.4.5 to 3.5.0, and they're like, well, okay, yeah, sure, why not, right? So those kinds of things are definitely useful. Then you have basically targeted things like teams that actually have specific problems and they want to use this customization. I think that's the hard part, is really to know how to customize it, because you have to spend some time doing it. That's as a startup where we are kind of still like getting off, like understanding how can this be more like a self-service thing, and don't have to come to us and say, look, we have this problem, can you configure it for us, right?
I noticed that you know, you get the comment by ReviewPad as a bot in your timeline. I've been in companies to where you have a particular PR and there's a lot of activity and back and forth and pushing and changing. The timeline starts to become really, really large. And then of course, GitHub takes over and starts to collapse all that. I mean, does ReviewPad just continually replace the single comment instead of just being more like an append so it doesn't get lost in the timeline so you don't lose track of what's going on from a ReviewPad perspective?
Yeah, it does. So basically what happens is there is the report, this report that you have seen here. This is something that is dynamic. So what happens is if I, for example, say I didn't merge this PR, but I actually make another push where I fix or I change the title, ReviewPad is going to run again, and this error is going to disappear. In fact, if I simply do this and just put docs, I'm not sure if it's going to run because it's already merged. But if it ran, this thing would disappear, right? So the system would run again, and this one here would disappear, this error message, because then you wouldn't have any more an unconventional title. Okay. So it's basically knowing, there's a notion of state here that is constantly updating, because if you just put a new comment, then you get a lot of spam, and we want to avoid that.
And does it stay at the top as well, or does it usually?
Yeah, it stays actually at the bottom, if I'm not mistaken, because that's how GitHub actually provides the comments, because it's basically editing the comments all the time. So that's how it works.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if there's anything else. There's one more.
Hey, so my question would be, how can you integrate this with other tasks that are running? So let's say I have a couple of linters. Does it wait? Does it run when they finish?
That's a great question. Yes, you can. So basically what you can do is, so let me show you what we do in our own project. So the short answer is yes, you can wait, and you can also access the results of those checks. So what we have in our main project is, if I'm a developer and if I'm one of the close maintainers of the project. So as you can see, all these things are produced by ReviewPad, all this labeling. But if I go and select, so let me just go here and just select ship to show you exactly what's happening. So the first thing we do is we control whether the CI should run based on a label. Okay, so we have one rule that says if you need to run the CI, you're going to put this run build label, because it's very annoying for us to start running the CI when you just modify, files that are not really about code. So why should I build and run tests when I'm just like modifying, something that is not about that? So the CI is only triggered when you actually put this label. And if I put a ship label, then we have a rule that says, okay, only merge after the CI is finished. So after the process of the PR build is finished and it's green. If it's not green, it's not going to merge it for you. So you're basically able to enforce that what you want is you want to be able to ship things that change code, but you only want to ship, like merge, if the CI is passing, if the linters pass, if, whatever bot you have, if SonarQube doesn't provide any kind of highly secure security vulnerabilities. So you can do those kinds of specifications.
Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Else?
I think one more.
Hi, congratulations first.
Thank you.
Actually, it's just a comment, not a question. On my last job, I remember, actually it was a big startup in Brazil, like more than 400 developers. And they changed Jira for a cheaper version of software. And it was actually good. I love supporting small business. I also co-founded a startup. But I remember that my first job was to integrate this management tasks with every kind of GitHub actions to the pull requests and everything, because there was no API like Jira. There was,
I see.
There was no integration. So we had to create the integration from scratch. And I remember that my first question was like, why can the product managers and the people in management cannot access somehow, some level, directly the GitHub and see some results there? Like there was a question like, why do we need to integrate everything? and create an API for everything. If GitHub will do, if you change the thing to be cheaper, why not like just there's a solution there and we can create there? If you're saving money, let's actually try to save, in another way. And I think that's really cool because it gives a lot of documentation, and this documentation can help management for that. That's
Right.
Yeah, that's really cool. Just make this comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We see that basically there is two things, right? When you, for example, you go through an audit, people care more about Jira than they care more about what's happening on GitHub sometimes. So what they actually want is all the things that are happening on GitHub, put them on Jira, and not kind of a better way to integrate both of them. And that's sort of surprising to me. I'm not so sure. Like, I need to start talking with auditors to understand exactly if they're just lawyers. I mean, like if you talk, for example, if you talk about, right. Yeah, for sure. But one of the things I was very surprised about is like, this SOC 2 compliance process, right? This is done by certified accountants, right? This is not done by even technical people, and even the report that you get can be very different depending on which company you. So that was like, okay, this is kind of really kind of strange to me all these things are happening. I think the idea here is really that you should be able to specify like a little bit more like what should be audited is the process, and the process should be like transparent and like specified somewhere. And then if you're using Jira or if you're using GitHub or not, almost doesn't really matter, right? Because if you just have a tool that enforces your process, as soon as your process is specified somewhere, it's not like just a text natural language, but some sort of formal language that you can basically say, now we have a tool that can come and automate all these things. That's it. That's a different abstraction. It makes things much easier, right? And that's kind of what we are pushing here, is more like audit the process in a better way than instead of auditing Jira or auditing Confluence or auditing GitHub or whatever you're using, right? You should be able to change that and not have people just spending years building integrations. Right.
Okay. All right. So I have a question about process. You said that the YAML file lives in each repository. What if I change the YAML file?
Yeah, you can protect it. So the first thing we typically do is to protect the YAML file as we protect the license, so that you cannot merge, for example, without approvals, the file itself. The other thing we do as well is you can import it. So typically what we see in bigger companies is that they want to have a process all across all the teams. So they want one core specification to live in like one particular repo that only one person has kind of access. And then if I want to have different repos, then I just want to import that one and then extend it a little bit. So this is what we see, but you definitely need to be careful about it. It's like a license file, right? How do you make sure that people are not going and changing it to MIT license, and you don't want that, right? So it's, I think, a little bit in that kind of, but I think this GitHub approach is very good because it's the PR is very good to document that, right? As Git is, right? So you can basically block and say, okay, this PR cannot just be merged because it's touching a sensitive file.
Thank you.
When it comes to those files that you want to protect, does ReviewPad set those protections up by default for the YAML or for the license, or is that something you have to explicitly do?
Yeah, right now you basically have to explicitly do. So one of the things we have to improve, I guess, is really, there is certain patterns that you see, right? So license files or like, Terraform is really like almost all the companies we talked with, they want to protect the infra as code. It's very rare that you just want to make changes that people just merge, because you want to be able to test things, even understand costs now. There's really cool plugins now where you can even see like, if you open a PR, you change your infra as code and it tells you your bill is going to go from 50K to 100K. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm not going to merge these, right? So those seem to be really, I think the most sensitive thing now people have is like licenses and infra as code, and like everything that access databases or get input from the users. We see a lot of people doing security, but security is a big buzzword nowadays. Like if you have like so many security reports now. It's almost, there's companies now basically, the value they provide is on how to prioritize the security alerts, right? So you have like 5,000. It's like running a SonarQube, right? Right. So a lot of these things are just checkboxes, right? You run tool X, you run tool Y, and then you can say we are running these tools, right? But whether you're using them in a practical way, but it's, I mean, I've been doing static analyzers for 10 years, right? So 50. I know that when you have false positives, developers are like, okay, I have 50,000 alarm. Like, don't run a SonarQube on your code base and expect to get a lot of value out of that, right? You need to run it like across time, and do all these things, because there's just too many alarms. It's very hard to get value out of that.
Speaking of static analyzers, then when it comes to ReviewPad, I would assume it has the ability to be able to detect, for example, hey, I got all these particular warnings from my syntax that need to be fixed for coding style or something like that. I mean, for example, all of my stuff is C# and .NET. I mean, would it work with that? Would it be able to detect that and pick that stuff up and then be able to control that PR based off of it?
It can, but, and let's not use but, and it can be improved, right?
Yeah.
So the thing is, we are really building an ecosystem, right? We support like 15 languages at the moment. But it's like different layers. I think one of the reasons why static analysis works well with PRs is because it's a much more contained problem, right? You're modifying a small set of files, and then you can really say, are these just formatting changes, right? You just parse it, just compare the ASTs. Have a very fast way of doing that, and you get in like 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 1 second, you get a good reliability from that. Things become more complicated when you start trying to specify like security vulnerabilities with these rules, right? When you want to say, we actually have a SQL injection, right? So I'm changing some code from my database access. Is it sanitized? Is it properly sanitized, for example? Those rules are much more costly, right? So we are kind of experimenting and seeing where the threshold is, because we also don't want to overlap a lot with other companies or other tools that basically just provide that value, right? So we want to integrate with that. It doesn't make much sense to reinvent the wheel. I think we do a lot of that ourselves sometimes.
Is C# supported?
C# is supported, but I'll leave it up to you to
That's what I want to hear.
to create some bug fixes. Okay.
So I was wondering, do you have like a place where I can see a bunch of example like rules and stuff? Like one that I thought was pretty interesting is the first time contributor one, for example, like one that I would want to just copy and paste that one over. Is there somewhere I can find all this?
Yes. So basically what we have is, in the documentation, we have a couple of some use cases page. Yeah, I'll just zoom in. So we have use cases, and you actually can play with ReviewPad in a sandbox environment. So if you go to our website, you can basically try it out in the playground. So here, what you can do is you can just have a couple of use cases. And for example, I want to label based on the size, and I can put a PR from an open source project, and then I can just run it and see what would actually happen in this PR, right? What automations would be done. So then you could basically just use it here. Sorry. So basically, you can select the use cases. This is a YAML that you can play with, and then you can just run it in a sandbox environment and see what are the actions that you're going to do.
Okay.
And yeah, so the first use, we also have like, some point ago, I wrote this blog post, which is like automations that everyone wants to have in 5 minutes, because we see a lot of people just using like 5 different GitHub actions for doing this, where you can just use it in like 20 lines of YAML and then use one GitHub action or one GitHub app to do that, right? So that's definitely something that I recommend, if you can give us some feedback, is really just like, it's actually I put it 1 minute, so maybe that's a bit too ambitious. I like to leave it up to you to tell me. But that's pretty much like one of the rules that we have, right? So just can just copy paste these.
One thing that I was just thinking is it could be cool to have maybe like a list of ones that are useful for open source or ones that are useful for a startup or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. This is something we have to keep doing better, right? Just getting the entry point easier and easier, and get all these models so that people don't have to think so much.
Okay, thank you.
And using AI to speed up rules that you never thought about, right? But I'm now going more in the entrepreneur side and giving you the buzzwords, right?
I know I got a lot of questions. Do you guys have any kind of IntelliSense or anything like that as you're typing out the YAML, like some kind of VS Code extension or something like that, to help with people who might not be familiar with the syntax?
We do. So if you go again to our docs, there is here on tooling, VS Code. So if you
Very
use
nice.
this, it will basically have the schema that we have. So it will give you like errors if you're typing something that doesn't work. And again, if you have your open source project, yeah, just feel free to just copy paste it here, put your like a PR of examples here, and then just run it just to make sure that it's going to go well. I think
Okay,
we can
thanks.
have some beers and keep the discussion flowing after that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, just one last thing. If you have some feedback for us, I think there is something, right, Adriano, like a QR code that I should share with you.
This QR code just leads you to our channel about DevTools Porto, where you can say some things about DevOps Porto as well. We'll pass it on, and yeah, let's make the next edition better. So enjoy, have a beer, and yeah, see you next time.
All right.